you can take the time to do that. So here's our first industry myth. Industry days and similar events are just of low value to everybody because nobody shares information. So you can read this for yourself. But the FAR specifically authorizes these industry days, so you're allowed to do that. And as you know, if the FAR doesn't tell you not to do it, you can do it. And it's a very effective way to get some good input into your acquisition. You can do all sorts of techniques besides industry days, a lot of market research, pre-solicitation conferences, pre-solicitation or pre-proposal conferences, site visits. There's a lot of way to get this industry input up front into your requirement, because I got to tell you, as great as government folks are, we don't have all the answers. And I think there's a lot of industry folks out there that have the answers and want to help us if we'll just ask the question. So let's go to the next one. So conducting discussions after receipt of proposals just adds too much time to the schedule, and we don't have time to do that. So our position is, if you build this into the schedule, you'll actually have a faster acquisition because you'll get a better solution, and everybody will know up front that you need this time in the schedule, so you can cut out some other parts of the process that aren't value added and make sure that you incorporate this part. It's so important because if you don't have discussions, you are leaving money on the table. Okay, so there's two aspects to that. You get a better understanding between government and industry, and you get a better value for the government. Very key. One thing we did as part of myth busting is that we partnered with Act I Act, and they had a website up called Better, I think it's Better Government IT. It's not up right this second, but on that website we put out these 10 myths, and we got comments from industry folks and government folks. It was great. It started a really good conversation. So some of those comments are incorporated here. That's what this industry comment is. Government should release the section CL&M in a draft, and don't just put out the statement of work, because that doesn't really help the vendors understand the total procurement that you're looking for. You have to have all of the pieces of it so they can understand. That's going to help them because they'll say, oh, this isn't really in our realm and perhaps we shouldn't bid, or that will give them enough information where they understand really what you're looking for, and then you can get the best solution. So that was a comment from industry. Let's go to the next slide, Sarah. So I didn't want to just put up the myths without giving you some tips to take back to the office and try. So it's really important to understand your customer. As you know, a lot of customers, when I first started in my career, they were downright scared of contracting people. Did you ever see like 3 contracting people walking down the hall, and the customers, they just scattered? They're like, oh no, it's contracting coming. We don't want that. We want to be close to our customers. So I've always found it most effective to organize your office around the customers. And that way you can get close to them, you understand what they want. And I have an example for you. I worked at the Army Non-Appropriated Fund agency. It was called CFSC at the time. And one of our customers was the World Class Athlete Program. Sounds simple, athletics. So we did the contracting for them, and they kept wanting these 4-year contracts, and then they wanted to it seemed arbitrarily just cancel them anytime they wanted. And we were befuddled because this did not fit into our model of what we thought a good contract should be. So we, since they were a customer, we started meeting with them, and we came to understand that these are the Army athletes that are in the Olympics program. You may have seen some of them. Some of them have won some Olympic medals in the past. But so, of course, it's on a 4-year program. And of course, if an athlete is in the queue to go to the Olympics, but something happens and he doesn't qualify, then don't need the athlete, don't need the coach. So then you terminate the coach's contract. And once we understood that, we could come up with really creative solutions of how to help that customer. And we came up with some ideas on how they could have an easier time with contracting. So that's the kind of understanding that will really help you help yourself, but also help your customers. So that's important. Share the process. So we were at a DOI conference in Denver a few months ago, and one of the contracting chiefs stood up and said that this is very common sense. And so I hadn't really thought of it, to tell you the truth, but it's great. She said she talked to her customers until she was blue in the face about the process. and why it was important to, have a certain amount of time to do things, and they just didn't get it. They thought if they submitted a requirement that they should get the product like the next day or something. And so I'm sure none of your customers are like that, right? But so she took the time to write down the acquisition process real briefly, just explain to them the different pieces of it. And once they sat down, it was like a light bulb went off, and they went, "Oh, why didn't you tell us that months ago?" And ever since then, they've been getting along much better, understanding each other's roles. And so that's a really good practice to take back if you haven't done that yet with your customers. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's lots of stuff on the internet like that. So just look for it and sit down with your customer. And finally, incorporate vendor engagement into your milestones to make sure that you have time for them. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to plug them in because your customer is going to be, "Oh, nope, I need that too quickly. We don't have time for that." So if you set the stage up front, that will make it much easier for you. So let's move on to information exchanges. So we believe that you should share as much information as possible with your vendors. And you'll see some techniques for doing this in the case studies that come after me. So here's a couple of myths. Can't meet one-on-one with a potential offer. Not true. The FAR specifically allows these one-on-one meetings, and they're very helpful. This is a comment that we got on that IT website from a government contracting individual. "Bad things will happen to me if I don't communicate the same thing to everyone at the same time." Well, just understand where you are in the process. If it is prior to the RFP being released, you can do this under the guise of market research. So you can have these one-on-one meetings. After the RFP is released, you need to understand that, yes, you need to make sure everybody gets the same information, but as long as you understand where you are in the process, this is a very good technique to use. Another myth is government meets with vendors, they're going to submit an unsolicited proposal, and that's going to torpedo the whole timeline. Not true. So we would just ask that you refresh yourselves on unsolicited proposals. They don't interfere with the acquisition process. So let's move on to the next one, Sarah. A protest is something to be avoided at all costs. And I think that's really where this hesitation to have really good vendor engagement comes from. People are afraid of protests. Now, I've had a protest or two in my time, and I totally understand they're a lot of work. They sidetrack you from getting your other work done, but please do not let this scare you from having good vendor communication. As you know, my boss came from GAO, and he points out all the time that there are so many procurements, and just a few little bit of them are protested. Okay, so it's well worth you taking the time to communicate with your vendors, and if you get a protest, you deal with it, but I think chances are, and in my experience, the more information you share, the less chance of protest, because they understand what you're doing, they think the process is fair, and we'll talk about debriefs in a minute. That's a whole nother story, but don't let that stop you, this concern stop you from having vendor engagement. Let's hit the next one. So when you award an order from the federal schedules, you don't have to do a debriefing. Not true, and also it's a very bad practice. I found in my career that the more you can share with the vendors, I was on the industry side as well for the first part of my career, and I just yearned for that information. Tell me where I went wrong, or tell me, tips, because we always wanted to improve. We always wanted to get that next job, and unless the government folks would share that with us, we just had no idea. The other side benefit to these debriefings, and that's not just for federal schedule debriefings, but any debriefings, be sure and have your technical folks there. You get a twofold benefit from that. Number one, you get the support of the folks that really understand the technical stuff. I don't know about you, but I can hardly answer my phone. So when I have a big complex IT acquisition, I need the experts there to help me explain, what was wrong with the proposal or what fell short. But also, I found that the technical folks do a much better job next time because they understand what you have to do in a debrief and what kind of questions you get, and they're looking the vendors right in the eye. So they're like, okay, we're going to make sure we give you plenty of documentation next time. So that's a side effect as well. So be sure and share with your vendors. Let's see. Can you go back just one more, Sarah? Yeah, here's an industry comment. Somebody put on that website, a really great idea, which is to have a procurement library of all the documents that affect the procurement that vendors can go in and look at, because oftentimes the perception is that you just want the incumbent. And of course the incumbent's the one that knows all the information. So if you can level that playing field and put all the information that will help all the vendors understand you want competition, understand your agency, understand what the problem is, I think you'll get much better competitions. So let's move on. What are a couple tips here? Really do as much market research as you can. The more that you can understand the industry, the vendors out there, the solutions, the better outcome you're going to have. And you can get some help doing this. Your customers should be doing some market research as well. You're not going to give any vendor an unfair advantage, because when you're doing market research, you're getting information. You're getting information. And once again, when the RFP goes out, you make sure that everybody gets the same information, and you'll be kept clear with that. And during the debrief, we just covered this. Give as much information as you can. I was talking to, I think it was the HHS conference, and somebody in the audience told me something that really surprised me. And after 30 years in contracting, there's not a lot that surprises me. But so he said he was at, I think he was at Treasury, and they did a procurement. And you know how you have the evaluation plan that the team has filled out, and you take that plan, and usually I take pieces of the comments. Okay, you fell short in this area because of this sentence. Well, they gave the whole plan to the vendor, the unsuccessful offer, not all the plans, mind you, but just their evaluation plan. And the vendor was delighted because they could see every little step, every little piece of how they were rated on their proposal. The agency was happy because they could share as much information as they wanted, and guess what? No protest. No protest at all. So that's something you might want to think about, and I would encourage you to talk to your procurement attorneys. But I think that might be a very fine strategy to try as far as getting information out. So let's move on. One last piece of the process. How are we doing time-wise? We're doing great. I wanted to mention up front that we're not going to have questions after every session, because I think some of the questions that you'll have after my session will be answered in either the case study or in the panel presentation. So we're going to hold the questions till the end, and at that time we'll have a couple microphones going around so we can get all your questions. So take notes, and we'll be glad to get your questions after all the presentations are over. But so increasing competition, that's so important, right? So here's a myth. Getting broad participation by many vendors, oh, it's just too difficult. We should just stick with the ones we have. Bonk. I don't like that one, and I hope none of you like that one either. There have been so many times, although, again, I'm sure your customers aren't like this, where, okay, my customer comes to me and says, oh, well, you know, this contract is going so well, we like this vendor, and we need to have this vendor again. And so, of course, in the contracting office, we say, you know, I understand that, and I'm glad things are going well, but let's try seeing how many competitors we can get. We can have a really good competition. And I've done that on more than one occasion, and when my customer finally agrees with me and we have this open competition, get some new vendors, it seems like most of the time they're really delighted. And they come back, and the next time they want more competition. I think we all agree that competition is great. I have another example for you. At the SEC, we were re-procuring the Edgar system, which is the big system that all the industry folks put their financial statements and all that stuff in. And we had had the same vendor, a very good vendor, for years and years and years and years, like maybe 15 years. So it comes to us, and they, all of a sudden, our customer really wants competition. They want something new. They want open source, whatever that is, and all these new IT things. But we were concerned that the perception was that, oh, this guy has it because he's been the vendor for 15 years. So what we did was we really pushed hard to get the word out that we want some good competition. We want some new ideas. So we sent out a letter along with a request for information. We had a pre-solicitation conference. The chairman of the SEC came to the pre-solicitation conference and told all of the vendors, you know, what our ideas were. We want competition. We welcome competition. We released the list of vendors at that conference so that they could partner, recognizing that it was a really big project and we wanted to make sure small business got their share. And so we ended up getting a new contractor we were very happy with some new ideas and a lot cheaper. So in this tight budget time, something to consider. There's plenty of seats over here. It won't interrupt us at all. If you guys want to come sit down and be comfortable, we have a good presentation for you, and I want you to all be comfortable. Great. So let's move to the next one, Sarah. So another myth. Giving industry only a few days to respond is okay because we've been talking to them for a while. Not true, right? Being on the industry side, I can tell you, too many late nights are not good. A one-day turnaround, not good. So you need to give the vendors enough time to be able to prepare an adequate proposal. Otherwise, you're telling them you don't really care about their proposal. You don't really care if they can have enough time to give you something good to come up with a good solution. So if you're really interested in a good solution, give your vendors the time. Any more, Sarah? Okay, a few more tips to try when you're back at the office. Let industry know you're interested in a good competition, so all of the information that you put out, make sure you say that. We're looking for a good competition, we're looking for some good ideas, and make sure that the vendors are able to understand what your problem is so that they can give you a good solution. Issue draft solicitation as much as you can. RFIs, there's lots of techniques that you can do, and we'll hear some of them in the case studies, to get industry input as much as you can. And I do have a couple ideas. It's something I found just this week when I was looking on the internet. GSA recently, these are examples from mid-July, so they're very fresh examples. GSA held a virtual industry day. Now, I was really impressed because I really wasn't kidding when I said I'm not technologically competent. So, and if you want they archived this whole industry day, virtual industry day. If you want the link, email me. My email is going to be at the end of the presentation. I'll be glad to send it to you. It's just too long for me to tell you right here. But so I checked it out, and they're looking for a solution for complex professional services that have an IT component. And apparently that particular requirement is in several different GSA schedules, but not in one. So they're looking to the vendor world to say, hey, this is out there. How can we get some really good proposal? What should our approach be? And so they have this industry day presentation where they talk about the requirement, they talk about GSA, they talk about what's in the market now, and then they have some questions for the vendors. And it's online, so as a vendor, you can go look at it 10 times if you want, or you could share it with your colleagues. It's a really, really great idea, and I think it's going to be the beginning of a good exchange for that requirement. So that might be something to look at. And then HUD recently held an industry day in Denver targeting small businesses. And what was interesting about that is they got some good feedback, but they had 200 people in person in Denver. I don't know about you, but I love Denver, so I would have gone if I'd known about it. But also they had 100 people conferenced in. So they had people from all over the country interested in this industry day, and they found a way to reach a whole bunch of them. So think about that next time you're doing an industry day. If IT is out of your comfort zone, then find a friend like I have, Min Hai in the front row, who's an IT expert, and that friend can help you figure this IT piece out and how to incorporate it into your procurements. I think we have maybe one more slide. Oh, so a couple tips. We're not ending the conversation on effective vendor management collaboration with this myth-busting memo. So we have myth-busting 2 coming up that my friend Al Munoz in the back, raise your hand, Al. Al's great. He's on detail to OFPP for 3 years, right, Al? It's actually 3 months, but I'm in denial, and I'm going to see if he can stay longer. But so he's coming up with some industry myths instead of just the government myths. And then part 3 of this project is vendor-friendly contract strategies. And so I'm in the process of collecting those now, so I'm sure all of you out there have some good ideas for me. So I'm going to cover some of them here, but if you go back to your office, whether you're industry or government, and you have I need to tell her this, please send me an email and tell me, because I'm trying to get all the best ideas, and I know I don't have them all that you guys do. But so here's a couple more ideas in the vendor-friendly contract strategy. SOO is effective, so if you really don't know what you need, use a standard objectives, and it's a very easy way to tell industry what your overarching problem is, and as long as you share information with them as to what, give it context, tell them what the agency's like, what's happened in the past, industry's the one that can help you solve that. So I'm a big proponent of a statement of objectives. Again, make sure to align section C, L, and M. I know that we're all very overburdened, especially this time of year. You have, what, two minutes to spend billions of dollars, right? But so do the best you can with this, and have somebody that's in your office that you trust just look over your solicitation before you issue it, and they can catch a few things that you're just so busy because you're cranking out these requirements. They can catch some of that stuff and make your solicitation that much better. Page limits are okay, but please be reasonable. Don't make the vendor answer this very complex question in, oh, one page double spaced. It's not quite going to get you what you want, so give that some thought. And then this is one that, as you can tell, I'm not good at it because I'm not good with technology. Allow for e-submissions of proposals when you can. It makes it easier on the vendor. You don't have somebody carting in. Have you ever seen the vendors come up with a truck and they cart in all these boxes and you have to go get them? So think about this. E-submissions would be easier on everybody. So any more slides, Sarah? Oh, a couple more. Well, we talked about CL&M. Develop a realistic milestone schedule and stick to it. One thing I didn't realize once I was in the government world was the impact that if I slipped on a milestone schedule, what impact they had on the vendors. Because picture this, they're lining up, they got this great opportunity, they've lined up their team, they've hired these people, they submitted their proposal, and then, oh, it's not awarded when they planned, and oh, it's not awarded a month later, 2 months later. Sometimes it's beyond your control, but if you start planning up front, the vendors are going to have to let these people go. They'll be out of a job. And once I realized that, I said, gosh, this is really important, that do a realistic milestone schedule. Don't just put one in just to check the block, I have this schedule, but think about it and think what you can meet so that everybody can understand the playing field. Again, have a colleague review your document. That's always a best practice. And I think we covered the other two, so I think we just have one last page. So we're not going to take questions right yet, but again, if you have ideas, here's my contact information. That phone goes directly to my desk. I'd love to chat with you if you have ideas, or if you have any questions about things in OFPP, I'd be glad to take your calls as well. So we're going to move on to the case study portion of our presentation, and we have two folks who are going to share some really good case studies with you. I'll introduce them both at the same time, but Bill's going to be the first one to talk to you. Bill Thureen is the Director of Enterprise Acquisitions Division, Office of Procurement Operations, Department of Homeland Security. Boy, Bill, you must have a card that's like that big with all that. That's great. And I met Bill when we were going out doing some research on specialized IT acquisition cadres, and I realized that he was a fountain of knowledge, and he also knows a lot about vendor engagement. So thank you, Bill, in advance. Bill helped to sort of craft this seminar, and so he's going to present a case study from DHS. And then following Bill, we're going to have Deepak Bhargava, who's the Deputy Director, Office of Financial Innovation and Transformation, Department of the Treasury, and he has a good story to share as well. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to Bill Thureen.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, my name is Bill Thureen. I'm a contracting officer in the Department of Homeland Security. And in 2007, I had the good fortune of being assigned as a contracting officer for what would be the largest procurement ever in the history of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. I think this procurement will demonstrate the practical application of a lot of the concepts Joni just talked about and a lot of the things that are in the Mythbusters memo. And just a comment on that first. I've talked to our intern community about the Mythbusters memo, and I really think it was directed at our old-timers. We got a lot of curmudgeonly old contracting officers out there, and we're really trying to get our newer cadre to be thinking a little more open-minded. So again, I think you'll see some of the things we did in this procurement do apply a lot of those concepts. And I will note, you'll see some of the things we did were maybe extreme, or things that you might think may not be applicable to the procurement you're doing if you don't think it's very large, but I think every single activity we did had a benefit. So if you use any of these things, I think you're going to see a real benefit. So next slide, please. So this is a description of what we were buying. This was from our statement of objectives, just to give you a little sense for the magnitude of this. But we basically had an agency that had extremely long-standing business processes that were based upon the submission of forms for immigration benefits and citizenship benefits, for our immigrant community. And they were looking to transform themselves, all their business processes, to a model that was person-centric. So an immigrant or an applicant would have an identity with the agency and not just a form. So this was really a very overarching transformation of the agency. What was interesting about it was we really were open-minded enough to allow virtually anything to be proposed. Again, we were looking to transform, but the expectation was the range of solutions, and our openness to a range of solutions was dramatic. And we were really expecting fairly complex and unique solutions, but we were also expecting dramatically different solutions. And in fact, we were open to vendors actually taking over bits and pieces of agency operations. So again, anything goes. So that's what we were buying, and it presented us with a couple of initial problems to solve. So next slide, please. So how do you do market research on something like this? So that was our first problem to solve. The second was, how do you prepare an acquisition strategy that provides enough flexibility to these contractors to be able to provide an innovative solution, and for us to make a source selection when we were going to get dramatically different solutions. And lastly, how do you make the contractors or the offers knowledgeable enough about our agency to be able to give us good solutions, with the typical process being we give them an RFP and everything that we want them to know is contained in those documents. So we really want to do much more than that. So next slide. So how do we do market research? Well, one, just simply looking on the internet for information we knew wasn't going to work. So what we did was we started with an RFI, and we basically put one out to industry and just made a problem statement. This is the problem we're trying to resolve, and we're looking to you to give us your thoughts and ideas on how we might go about doing this. We got an excellent response from that, and we ultimately had one-on-one discussions with those vendors. So we invited not everybody in, we invited the ones that had something to share with us, something that was relevant, something that we thought had merit. So again, that first effort at communications happened really early in this procurement. From that, it actually helped us take that feedback and figure out how to go about doing this. Because really we had that statement of objectives at that moment was very little. I mean, we really knew what we were trying to do. We really didn't have enough to better articulate it. So again, those interactions through that RFI and the ideas we were getting really helped us to better formulate this thing. So I'm skipping forward a little bit here, but we ultimately crafted an RFP, and we issued a draft RFP to the industry community. And again, we solicited their feedback, we solicited their thoughts and ideas so we could just refine this thing as best we could. With that said, moving on to the next slide, that's how we did the market research. And again, that took some time. We thought it was very effective, very informative. So how did we do the procurement? Well, one, we looked at doing IDIQ contracts under FAR Part 15. We looked at doing commercial item acquisitions. We looked at virtually all available contracts out there that were available to us to do a procurement. And ultimately what we determined was we had the contracts in DHS already. They're called DHS Eagle, which if you're not familiar with those, they're very similar to GSA Alliant or NIH's CIO SP2 contracts. So fair opportunity under FAR Part 16. We solicited 27 Eagle Prime contractors, and you'll see that we did this as a two-phase procurement. And we did that for a very specific reason. It was our intention to, in our education process, that we were going to let these companies basically come in and learn everything about us. Do we want 20 companies or 27 companies wandering our halls? Well, absolutely not. So that's why we did the two-phase procurement. And ultimately what we asked for in phase one was give us a concept of how you would do this and your relevant experience in doing transformative business processes or transformative initiatives so we could gauge whether you were really relevant in this procurement. And then, we asked for a rough order of magnitude, so we just had some basic information, even though that was kind of pointless. And we brought them in to do oral presentations, to really share with us their thoughts and ideas, because we thought they could probably better articulate it orally than they could in a written proposal. Again, very informative. I thought that was an excellent process, and out of it, we were actually able to identify 3 exceptionally relevant contractors. Our phase 2 was where we were going to go to due diligence. The process I'll talk about in a little more in depth in just a moment. But what we were going to do, because we knew this was going to be a very large effort, and as I said at the beginning, you'll see some of the things we did. You probably won't want to go to that extreme, but any one of those activities I think has benefits. So it was our intention to offset their cost of doing due diligence. And I don't mean reimburse them for the whole thing. We gave them $200,000. So we issued each contractor a task order for $200,000, and we basically told them that as a condition for payment of an invoice, you had to submit a compliant proposal for phase 2. One that we can actually evaluate and that had merit. We didn't want companies just to come in and trying to learn everything they could about our agency in hopes of finding out another procurement opportunity. So that was our process, and I think that process worked exceptionally well. All right, so due diligence. I don't know, I've heard the term bandied about quite a bit. I don't know if everybody has a clear understanding of that, but this really is under FAR 15.201, discussions with offers before receipt of proposals. That original concept of operations, or the concept for performing this, really wasn't a proposal. It was simply giving us a sense. So we hadn't gotten proposals yet. Due diligence is really much, much more than an industry day because it's an exchange of information. What we were looking for was getting something back from the contractors. And I'll quote our senior management, and this was a man that would eventually become our deputy secretary, basically said, and this was a statement he made to our leadership of this agency, you need to educate the offers about what you want, what you have, what's working and not working. Through those interactions with the professional contractors, you will also get a much better idea of what it is you want. And he couldn't have been more on the spot for that. I thought that was a very relevant statement. And I'll say it was important because doing this kind of process was a very difficult sell. Most of my customers do not want to spend a lot of time interacting with contractors, and what we were proposing to do was going to take us 3 months. And again, basically opening our doors to industry. So next slide, please. These are some of the processes we did in due diligence. So I'll talk briefly about these. Again, I'll try to give you a little sense for how we did this. But to begin with, the first question we asked when we invited those vendors to our due diligence was, what do you want to do? What do you think would be relevant to your company that would be beneficial to you and help and give us a better proposal and better inform you? Now, we listened to what they want. I can't say that we accommodated them on everything, but we did really want to hear what they thought was going to be beneficial. So we started with panel discussions, and I would say these are very commensurate with an industry day, where we would have panels. And again, these panels, we had quite a few of them. Some of these went for more than half a day, and we allowed these companies to come in and hear. The first one was with the director and deputy director of the agency. What are they trying to achieve through this procurement? And I thought that was very relevant. The companies got a lot out of that, at least to get a sense for what we were trying to accomplish. The next thing we did was we had panels with the different business owners in this agency. As I said, this transformation initiative was going to have a far-reaching effect across virtually all the operations of the agency. So these were plenary sessions where those panels basically pushed information out to the industry. So we had all the contractors in the room at the same time, let them hear what we were planning, and then here's where we did something more than an industry day. At the conclusion of that session, We kicked everybody out of the room. We let one contractor come in, one company come in, and they got roughly an hour one-on-one with that panel. Ask anything they want, get any kind of information, bounty ideas about. Now, we certainly weren't validating contractors' proposed solutions. You know, we had our rules, but it gave them some one-on-one time, and they could ask questions without their competitors in the room. Run them out, bring the next contractor in, and then we mixed it up because we did a lot of these panels. We did them with, you see, human capital. We did them with privacy and security, a lot of the different groups and business owners in the agency, and I thought it was extraordinarily relevant. The contractors became very well informed, and as I said at the outset, the panel members learned a lot in this process. A lot of the things that we're hearing from this company, they were like, wow, we didn't think of that, you know, we really weren't thinking it from that perspective, and it allowed us to make minor tweaks, you know, not based on a contractor's solution, you know, but some of the things we were hearing that we really hadn't considered. We also did site visits, and again, these are, you know, with the traditional, in one respect, you know, taking these contractors out, we went all over the country. We actually took them to an embassy in Mexico so they could see the immigration process down there. We took them to the National Records Center in Kansas City, and a lot of the CIS, USCIS service processing centers, so they could really get a sense. What we did that I think was even more beneficial was we let these contractors, I won't say wander the halls, but I will say they did not have to go about together. So they might have got a panel discussion by that office or that organization or that site, but we let them go accompanied by a contracting officer, contract specialist, to talk to actual clerks. They got to talk to clerks, they got to talk to managers, they got to talk to people responsible for different actions and activities in that agency or in that and really become much more informed. Now, this was a timely process, and I will admit it was an expensive process for these companies, and our $200,000 stipend really didn't do much to offset it. But again, at the conclusion of this, we got extremely positive feedback from all these companies. That was until we awarded the contract. And I will say, we laid out very clear rules. We did training sessions every time we were going to go somewhere and talk to somebody or have a panel discussion. We had a little training session for the panel members. We had a training session for the contractors, what was appropriate to ask, what wasn't appropriate to ask. And again, extremely beneficial process. So, and it took 3 months. I will say I had the luxury, first time and only time in my career, of not having a hard award date. You know, I wasn't up against the wall for an expiring contract or anything, so we did have adequate time to do this procurement. All right, so I won't be complete. If you could flip to the next slide without talking about just the following through in this procurement. So proposals came in after the conclusion of due diligence. Again, I had mentioned we were expecting dramatically different solutions and prices and all. And we did get that, exactly. We had over 700% variance in the labor levels on some of these proposals. Again, some were expressing interest in taking over parts of the agency operations. Some weren't. Some were only proposing IT systems, you know, to help us improve. And such. So obviously cost realism was a very important factor in here, and we really thought it was incumbent upon us to engage the offers in discussion so we can actually sit down and talk to them to better understand their proposals and that we could do a reasonable due diligence process on this. So, and that went well. So, next slide. I will say about a year later, because this was a lengthy process, we did make an award to IBM in the amount of almost $500 million. So as I said, you might not see the relevancy necessarily of this in the things you do day to day, but every one of those activities I thought would have had benefit if that was the only thing we did. We did do debriefings, and very comprehensive debriefings. We were very sensitive to the fact that these contractors had put an extraordinary effort in putting proposals together on this. It was a lot of work, and we could only have one awardee, and we had 2 unsuccessful offers. I will say we got a protest, and I truly believe the protest was more out of, wow, I just put a lot of work in this thing. I got to do something about that. But I think all the offers felt they were treated fairly, and I think that was in large part conveyed in our debriefing. And I will say proudly that the procurement did win the 2008 DHS Acquisition and Competition Excellence Award because of the efforts we took to really achieve competition. All right, next slide, please. All right, just in closing, the myth busting, I mean, obviously the memo came out long after we were done with this procurement bid. How did we do? You know, when I read the myth busters, it really resonated with me. Just for the things that we did on this procurement. I think we touched 8 of the 10 things that are listed in the Mythbusters, and the other 2 don't really apply to what we were doing. So, and again, I can't imagine how we possibly could have done this procurement without having that level of communications. And I really have gone to great lengths to make sure I do plan for communications in every procurement we do. So with that said, thank you.
I work as a Deputy Director in Office of Financial Innovation and Transformation within Department of Treasury. The story I'm going to tell you now is not in Treasury, but in my previous job, where I was working as a Director, Office of Financial Systems at Small Business Administration. At Small Business Administration, in 2006, we had a very, very difficult situation where we have our loan management and financial management systems, which were managing like $92 billion worth of portfolio, were obsolete, very difficult to manage, very expensive to maintain. If you have to make any changes to the systems, it was hard to make changes to the systems. And it was not meeting current requirements. It was not meeting current credit management requirements, financial management requirements, security requirements, and we had to do something about it. The problem was it was attempted 3 times and it never reached to a stage where we can actually acquire services. One of the reasons was no requirements. Nobody knows what the solution could be. Can you please flip this slide? Can you go to the first slide? Thank you. People don't know where to start. There were no documented requirements. And so in 2006, they decided to start the project all over again. I was assigned additional responsibility to lead that effort in 2006, and we had very limited money because the project just started. Like any other project, the first thing you do is you develop a business case. To develop a business case, you still need information. So we start talking to the vendors. What are our options? What can be done? And we use that information to build the business case, and we present it to OMB, we present it to House and Senate appropriation committees, and finally submitted the business case to OMB. But the business case was submitted for fiscal year 2008. What do we do in 2007? Next slide, please. So we faced significant challenges. We had like $400,000 seed money, and we don't know where to start. The first thing we needed to do was to document the requirements and identify a solution. When we estimated that, we found out it'll take 2 years to develop the requirements, and we don't have money for that. The other thing is you develop these requirements, you take 2 years, but then by the time you come to develop a solution, those requirements may be obsolete. The other thing is we wanted to use COT solution, and when you use COT solution, those requirements may not fit as it is. So how do we approach the whole thing? So we were looking at different approaches, and the 7 steps to performance-based acquisition using statement of objective sounds very appealing. Basically, instead of saying, here are your requirements, you say, here is the problem we are trying to solve. Can you go next slide, please? So we decided to adopt 7 steps to performance-based acquisition approach for this, and decided to basically define what our problem is. The problem with this approach, or the risk with this approach I saw, was how can you take from defining a problem to a solution which will meet your detailed requirements? And So we come up with another way of doing it, and we said we are going to use this approach, but we are going to develop something called scenario-based test scripts, and we are going to share it with the vendors upfrontly, which will not take as long time as developing the requirements. We can develop scripts within like a couple of months. So that is another thing we decided to use with that. But the whole purpose was, how do we facilitate the competition of ideas among the vendors? And that was the whole goal. And let industry help us identify the solution, but at the same time, we as a federal agency mitigate the risk that the solution we identify actually works for us. And there were some strategies we used. One of the strategy to mitigate the risk was the test scripts I told you about, but the other strategy was the first task order we will award is to actually pilot the solution using one of the loan programs so that we can verify before we go further down. Next slide, please. So the first thing we did was we established the integrated solution team, which means we picked people from different parts of the organization, from financial management, from credit management, from security, from IT, and assembled a team. We trained them on 7 steps to performance-based acquisition methodology. We trained them on how we are going to engage vendors as we proceed in this acquisition. Next slide, please. The first thing we did was then bring this integrated solution team, and together we defined what our problem is. We drafted the preliminary statement of objective. We drafted the preliminary test scripts. We shared that information with the vendors. Next slide, please. We adopted multi-phase market research approach. First, what we did was we issued sources sought notice to identify what kind of businesses can do this kind of work. We did RFI. We actually did the pre-solicitation notice. As part of the pre-solicitation notice, we released this draft statement of objective. We released draft test scripts. We met with vendors on one-on-one basis. We asked them, how can we improve our statement of objective? We asked them, how can we improve our test scripts? In the absence of detailed requirements, what else we can provide you? And we were surprised. We got a lot of good information. We got a lot of good feedback on our statement of objective. The vendors told us that, it's okay you don't have detailed requirements. What you can do is assemble all the processes you have documented in several places, assemble them and share with us. And that took less than 1 month. We went to different parts of the organizations, got all the process documentations we had at several places, assembled it and shared with the vendors. The results were good. We found out what is available in the market. Our integrated solution team actually learned a lot about market capabilities. We learned about experiences vendors have. We learned about acquisition strategies vendors proposed, the type of contracts we can use for this kind of thing. We improved our statement of objective based on that. So there was a lot of good information came out from this market research sessions, and especially this multi-phase approach we took. But I think the most we benefited was from one-on-one sessions with the vendors. Next slide, please. After that, we finalized the statement of objective, and based on the market research, we formed the competitive pool based on GSA schedule. The vendors we picked in the competitive pool, we invited them for due diligence sessions. We met with each vendor of 1 full day and give them full day to ask any questions on our requirements, our needs, whatever which can help them improve their proposal. So we had like 7 vendors. Each vendor got 1 day each with our IST team, and Then we gave them sufficient time to put together not only the solution, but they had to configure the solution based on our test scripts and demonstrate it. So we gave them 3 months actually to put together the proposal. Next slide, please. After we received the proposals back, one of the two things we had to do. One is oral presentations. We thought oral presentations is a very good idea, and that will give chance to the evaluation team to actually listen directly from the vendors and also ask questions as part of the oral presentation. The second was demonstration of their solutions based on the scenarios we put together. And so we saw those demonstrations. Once we awarded the contract, we actually invited the vendors who were not successful for debrief. We gave them sufficient time. In one case, we spent like half a day with the vendor, answered all their questions, shared why their proposals had weaknesses, and at the end of the day, we did not had any protest actually. Next slide, please. We completed the schedule acquisition by end of fiscal year 2008. We almost saved a couple of years, in going through this requirement process and then trying to acquire services. At the end of 2008, we had identified the solution. And our plan was to validate the solution using a prototype and then do the requirements incrementally and implement the solution incrementally. By the time I left, we had completed the pilot and verified that the solution actually will work for us. Thank you.
Okay, so I hope this is meeting your needs. So we had a foundation of vendor engagement and then some actual practical case studies, which I really enjoyed listening to that as well. So now we have our illustrious panel, and I'd like to invite them on stage, Kay and Dee and John. So to you three is, what kind of insights can you share with this group on effective vendor engagement that you've seen in your career and that might help them as they figure out how best to do this? Would you like to start, Dee?
Okay. Well, I would say that you've actually covered some very great points here today that I would reiterate. And one of those is the importance of a schedule. I think that I totally, when I was in government, did not realize how very important that is. Not only for your own kind of self-discipline to meet there, but also for the contractors who are out there. It was, although I was vaguely aware of it as a government employee, it was reality when I saw, up close and personal, when a contract slips and slips and slips. Contrary to many people's belief, there isn't a large bench or a bunch of overhead money to pay people. You walk in and say to people, thank you very much, and lay them off. Lay them off. All because somebody didn't meet their schedule. There are always extenuating circumstances, but circumstances that, I just didn't plan well. There's a lot of repercussions that I did not realize from a government standpoint and how they impact industry. Another thing I want to say, a little contrary to what's been said here, a draft RFP is sections A through M in total conclusive. It is not sufficient without a Schedule C, M, and L. Why? The contractor has to know, what are your small business expectations? Are you expecting to have a very high small business participation? Well, then they've got to go out and get those partnerships put in place. And if you only give them a Schedule C, they don't know what that is, and they can't do the planning and the work that needs to be done. Section I, all those clauses, they got to read them. How many reports are you going to expect? What kind of a system, what is in there that I have to prepare for? So I'm going to push back a little on the Mythbuster and say C, M, and L is not enough. Now, certainly for your RFI up front, but even for your draft RFP, industry needs to know and understand your total expectations. And as we all know in this room, there's a lot of other little gems and other parts of an RFP. So I'll start with that and then let you all throw something in.
John?
Well, I'd like to make maybe two observations. The first is that there is a perception that I've seen in government generally that the contracting process is sort of the end. And it's not the end, it's a means to an end. And sort of the corollary is the objective is not to have a perfect contract. In fact, it's been my experience, you see RFPs that have amendment after amendment, and the question is, well, why are we having these amendments? And the internal discussion is, well, we want to fix something. And the objective really is to select a partner. And so the RFP and the contracting process really should be driven by that. The partnership is the contracting community, the customer, and the vendor that's providing the support. And it turns out that the process is to go through, and I thought the examples that were given were extremely good in terms of focusing on what the objectives were of the business and then tailoring the contracting process to be able to suit those needs. Observation is, from my perspective, is what's the first thing that happens after you sign a contract? You change it. And so, I mean, it happens. They just continue to change and they evolve. So it's a partnership, and what you want is a framework, a structure. You want to evaluate, is this the vendor that's going to provide us the type of support that we need and be able to adapt as we go forward. The second comment I would make, and it's really echoing Dee's point, speed is really important. In part because time is money. And, oh, by the way, it's your money, because each of you in the audience is a taxpayer, I hope. And the money, there's sort of an insensitivity often that the costs of preparing a proposal, responding to an RFP, are somehow paid for by, the barons of industry. Well, they're paid for by taxpayer dollars because those bid and proposal costs are charged back to the government. And so time is money, but also it's important because the solutions are important. One of the things that I've observed, Joni mentioned I was a CIO. I spent most of my career really in acquisition. I was a PEO for a while in the Air Force, and that's really where I kind of honed my perspectives on acquisition. But time is important, and certainly in the IT world, getting technology to the customers is really important, and certainly in the military environment, Homeland Security and others. I mean, there's an urgent need to get the technologies that are available. It's often very frustrating to see that our federal employees, our military, are often not getting the advantage of the latest technology because the contracting process is too long. I mean, that's just totally backwards. That our contracting process should be driving then the ability or the inability in this case to be able to get technology. So the process should be a means to an end. It should be a business focused, and time should be important. And I'll maybe in future discussions maybe give a couple of examples of things that I think have been done and maybe give you some perspective of what perhaps should be done in the future.
Kay, we'd love to hear your insight.
Well, I tell you, what I noticed is, everybody hear me okay? What I've noticed is we're all on the same sheet of music, which is not too surprising, but also it makes me think that it bears repeating over and over and over again, because it's something sort of as a community we haven't, some of these things we haven't quite figured out. One of the things along sort of the speed discussion is on the government side, one of the myths that we talk about is if we have discussions, if we continue more communication, we're going to lose so much time, and we're all under pressure. So back to the speed on the government side, we're always under pressure to make those timelines. But it's pay me now or pay me later, because that's what will happen. And what I've seen in my career is time and time again where we've put the extra time. We talked about the due diligence process. We heard from both of our earlier case studies how the time spent up front really paid off. And when you're building that relationship with that eventual awardee, that time is going to be well spent. So you may lose some time up front, but it'll be worth it, and you'll make it up later. I think the other pet peeve of mine that we do, again, as a community, and I appeal to all the contracting folks, again, kind of along this speed line, is I can't say enough about the quick turnaround times for proposals and proposals over the holidays, whether it's a Thanksgiving holiday or whether it's the holiday we have in December, whatever holiday it is. I can't say enough about being on both sides, how that's just not what we want to do. So please keep that in mind when you're looking at proposal time. Make sure there's adequate time to get the information that you need, that you can have that communication, and that you're being reasonable with the work that's being asked to be done.
Can I throw one in there? And I will tell you, I said this in government, and I certainly say it now from an industry standpoint. Did you all know, do we all remember, it is perfectly acceptable to award a contract with a prospective start date. You could award a contract today with a start date of January 2012. Imagine that. The contractor could actually be prepared, ready to start. You could have your COTAR assigned. You could do training. You could all talk about what the contract. Can you imagine? Did you know that's perfectly acceptable, legal in all ways, shape, and form? You can award it subject to availability of funds if you have different kind of money. How many people have ever done that? Awarded a contract with more than a 2-week lead time. Good for you guys. Did you fudge your schedule? Is that, no. But, I mean, look, it can be done. I just ask you, benefit, good, bad, anything?
It was a benefit because the contractor wasn't ready to get started. So we had to give him time. It was an 8-day business. We had to give him time to get ready, to get started, to start the contract.
Could I add a comment? I think Kay's observation of balancing speed with sufficient communication was really important. It's important to understand that when we talk about costs, the highest cost spending on industry is after the RFP is received. That's the highest cost. So that's why amendments to the schedule then and changes to the due date, that drives the cost significantly. It's far less costly up front before an RFP is issued, and that's really where you want to have the intense discussion, and that's where you want to spend, as Kay said, enough time to ensure that the vendors understand what you want. I will tell you, it's painful for me. I've been in numerous situations, some when I was in companies, some when I was advising companies, and you sit around a table and the RFPs come out and the contractor vendors are saying, we don't understand what they want. I mean, it brings tears to your eyes because here's a company that may be spending $1 million or more.
Of the taxpayers' money.
Of the taxpayers' money, your money, and they think they're well qualified. They've had a lot of, but they do not understand what the government really wants. And so, they spend a lot of energy. It's a lot of wasted energy. So the upfront efforts, and I think the 2 examples that we heard were really well done of engaging with the industry, based on the individual situations you can tailor to ensure that they understand, if it's appropriate, narrow down the field. So you're not having 20 vendors chasing, because they do not all stand a good equal chance of winning. But do all that up front, because that's where it's time well spent, it's money well spent. it's when you get from the RFP to contract award is really when you want to move very quickly.
Yeah, and just to build on that a little bit, just a couple other thoughts that jumped out at me during the case studies, and then as we've been talking, is another one of our myths is that too much communication, then we'll end up increasing our chances for protest. And what's interesting is all the research will show that the absolute opposite is true. So I can't tell you how many times I've been face to face with a vendor trying to have a conversation as to, why we're at this point, and then you had a protest that was withdrawn. But what the answer I get back is, I just need information. I don't have enough information. So you want to, there's so many opportunities that we've discussed that, so that you don't get at the point where the vendor's saying, I have to protest because I just don't have information. And the other one, to kind of follow a little bit up on what John was saying about, not really knowing what, the government not knowing what they need, I can't emphasize enough the importance of market research. I love that commercial, the real estate commercial that says, I didn't even know those homes were there. It's actually to a tune, but I won't sing it for you. That wouldn't be a good thing. But it really makes the point that, there's so much information out there, there's so much information available, that you don't want to be halfway down the road that you're traveling with your acquisition and realize there's some incredible solution or some other opportunity that you didn't know about.
Great, those are great insights. So I wanted to ask you one more question, and we've sort of covered it a bit, but do you have any tips that these guys can take back and use tomorrow when they look at this new requirement they just got? And we'll do this one, and then we'll go to your questions out there. But Dee, do you have any little tips for these folks?
Well, I actually would reiterate what has been said here several times, which is, really read through your RFP in total. I think in the rush to get it out, or oftentimes if you just, step back and read it from start to finish and say, what do I really have here? Because I cannot tell you the number of them that are out there that have another contract name, clearly cut and paste, and there is a large percentage. You look at them and, there are some errors that I think are certainly not intentional, but in the rush or the assembly process, something went wrong. So I would say really read through your RFP, as simple as that sounds. The other one is, I assume we have a lot of contracts and program managers here. It sounds very trite and simple, but the more you know and understand your job and your role, the more confident you are and the more able you are to make these decisions and know what you can discuss and what you can't. So obviously a fundamental principle of all of this, whether you're government or industry, is a little self-development, keep current on current events, understand your clients and your customers, some of the things that were in the myth busters, because the more prepared you are for this business challenge, and it really is a business challenge, the better you will do. I'm always a little bit concerned when we talk about the average American is underwater on their house, $15,000 in credit card debt, hasn't saved any money for their kids' education, and doesn't have any retirement money, and we think they're going to walk into the government and be brilliant business people. Probably not going to happen. So, you need to prepare yourself for these really significant business decisions. They're not just contracting decisions or program decisions. They're business decisions on how you're going to spend your money as a taxpayer. And so preparing yourself for those challenges, I think, is really very important.
I like that. How about you, John? Any tips?
Well, I'd offer a couple of, and maybe a little vignettes. Similar to the examples, one of the things that I believed when I was in government, that it was important in order to be able to have effective communication, was to get a set of vendors that was a reasonable set. And so I instituted as a regular course what I called rapid down select. And the rapid down select was not an official two-step. But it was, in effect, the same thing, but we did it very quickly. Now, a couple of key points. One, we did it early in the process. Why early? Well, it's important that you do it before the vendors have spent lots of money. I mean, that's key. And so I'll describe the scenario, sort of went like this. You would publish information about the opportunity, you would have some exchange of information, but then you would ask, in this situation, it's a little different in the examples we had, you would ask the vendors to provide a short summary of their corporate capabilities and how they would propose going about solving the particular problem that we had. We would score those like you would a proposal, and based on the scoring, we would determine a subset of the vendors that we described as in the best position to be successful in bidding. Now, my job, at this time I was a PEO, so I was a senior executive, and my job was to call the people that were below the line. And what I would tell them is, I would go at a very senior level in the company, and I would say, here's the process we went through. Your company submitted a statement of qualifications and their approach, and we have determined that you do not stand a good chance of being successful in this solicitation. Now, I teach a course down at Fort Belvoir, and at this point I always ask, what do you think the response is? And the general perception of the government folks is, boy, they must have been really mad. And I say, absolutely not. Every time. The senior person said, thank you very much. Why? Because they only have so much money to go pursue so many opportunities. And what I was telling them was, you don't stand a good chance on this one. Don't bid. None of those companies ever bid. I did it repeatedly. And it's very quick, you can do it. So it's important, I mean, this is sort of common sense, but it's important, as we've been saying, to kind of understand what is the pressures, what's the business environment on the other side. And of course, key was do it before they've spent a lot of money and talk to somebody at a very senior level. If you talk to the person at the low level who was trying to capture this activity, obviously they have a lot of emotional energy tied up in this pursuit. And so they would be less receptive. But the senior folks, so it's very effective. And once you winnow down to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many you think is reasonable, the communication can increase. And I think the examples that were used showed that. And it is dramatically better than having 20 vendors. And of course, the government saves because you don't have as many proposals to evaluate. You, in many cases, eliminate companies that really didn't stand a good chance of being successful. You're doing them a favor. And as long as they haven't spent a lot of money, most of them are just delighted to now go off and focus on other things. So that's one example. A second one, and I learned this after I had, early in my PEO career, had a protest. And I called the company. I knew the senior people at the company, and I said, why are you protesting? And the senior person said, well, what do you mean, why are we protesting? He said, after you did this and you did that, and you're, and I said, well, where did you hear that? And he said, well, of course, we heard it from the person, our manager that went to the debriefing. Now, I had not gone to the debriefing, but I knew that wasn't what that person was told. But what I began to realize was, having been in industry, when you're bidding on a big proposal and you're the manager in charge, and there is a delay in the RFP, et cetera, you're continually going back to the senior management and you're saying, we stand a good chance of winning. And when the RFP is delayed or the award date is delayed and you need more money, you have to go back and ask for more money, and you say, no, we think we're in a very good chance to win this. Well, then comes the decision, they didn't win. And so what was that person doing on the airplane back from the debriefing? They were putting together their alibi. And the bottom line was, by the time they got back to the company, their response was, we were screwed. Now, I mean, this is psychology. This is not, you just got to understand, this is the pressure in the business environment. So after that, what I did was instituted a new process. And very similar to the example that was given in both of the case studies, we did the debriefings at the customer site. And so, again, my job was not just to call the winner, but to call the losers. And I called at a very senior level in the company, and I said, you were unfortunately not successful in this competition, so and so won, but what I would like to do is to offer to you and anybody in your company or your teammates to come do a debriefing. We'll have it at your site, and we will bring the source selection evaluation team, and we will debrief you. So we'd arrange schedules, we'd fly to wherever we needed to go, we would go into the meetings, and there are two things that we're trying to do. So the senior level person who generally showed up at the debriefing, they were trying to evaluate two things. One, did you follow your process? So did you follow the RFP? And second, did you have a reasonable basis for the decision that you made? Those are the only two things they were worried about. And so we walked through, this is the process. Basically, we just sort of briefed them on the RFP and then showed them we followed that process. And then what I had was the evaluation team give their briefing. They used the exact same charts that they had used to inform the source selection decision. We only showed them the winner and theirs. Now, as the session unfolded, what you found is initially there was hostility, there was anger. They spent a lot of time and money, they were disappointed they didn't win. They didn't understand, they thought they had done a great job. As the evaluation team began to explain, then you started to get questions. And the questions would say, well, wait a minute, you just said we did X and we think we did Y. And the evaluator would say, well, you did X, but the winner did something a little bit different. It wasn't quite what you just described, but the point was through the dialogue, what they would begin to say, yeah, you read our proposal, you understood it, and yes, you had a basis for making the decision. At the end of every one of those sessions, the senior person would come up to me and said, this was extraordinarily valuable, we learned a lot, we'll be better prepared next time, we thank you for doing it, we're certainly not going to protest. Never had a protest, because they understood, case point earlier. So I would offer to you, now whether you take those two specific examples and you try to do them exactly that way, the point that I would leave you with is understand the environment, both in the government but in industry. Where are the pressure points? Again, this is a business decision. And also I would advise, at times I would get the contracting and legal folks, well-intended that they would come to me and they would say, oh, you can't do that. That's illegal. So my last bit of advice, in particular for those that are not contracting and legal folks, is when that happens, ask them politely to say, well, why don't you come show me the law that says you can't do that, or the FAR. And because in general, the FAR and the law are very well written, and as Joni said earlier, in most cases, they let you do what sort of makes sense. And I think often we get very narrowly constrained into sort of things, we've done it this way before, we're going to do it again. And so Joni's point was courage. I would add leadership. It takes leaders to say, all right, we're gonna try something a little different. It's not prohibited. It fits our business objective, and so the examples that I gave were again trying to challenge maybe some of the common perceptions about interactions with industry and our processes.
Great. How about you, Kay?
Yeah, I just got a couple of quick tips to wrap up. To follow on the discussion that John had on debriefs, debriefs are extremely valuable. And I still hear too often, oh, great, the vendor didn't request a debrief, we don't have to do one. And my response to that is, you know what, that's not a good thing. That's not what we want, because this is our opportunity to hear from them as to what we could have done better and also what they can do better. So again, back to Dee's point about these precious taxpayer dollars, it all adds up. So if you're on the government side, don't let the opportunity slip by, even if it means calling the vendor and saying, you haven't requested a debrief and we still really want to provide you that opportunity. What do you think? And on the vendor side, I know you worry about relationships and being pests and those kinds of things, because I've been on that side of the table, but request a debrief. Make sure you get the debrief, because that's something, especially with the time and money, that's something you're owed, and in the end, it's better for everyone. And then finally, my final tip is probably the one that I probably do the worst at, and we as human beings are not necessarily good listeners. So my tip for everyone is to be a good listener, and that's really on both sides of the table. And maybe just a little bit of a ding for industry, and I can say that because I was on that side of the table. But we get a little bit arrogant sometimes, thinking, oh, you know, I hear the government, but I know so much better. And you're going to miss some opportunities by not really listening. So again, just be good listeners.
Joni, may I just add, you know, we've spent so much time, I think John mentioned this, we spend a lot of time as if getting to contract is the point. And I think we probably at this table, and certainly from the examples, because I'm kind of anxious to hear, and the end of the story is, you know, get to contract, but boy, there's a whole, you know, the real important point is after that. And I think even there, communication is just critical, because the government has expectations clearly that they've articulated in their contract, and to Kay's point, I think sometimes, you know, industry, we don't listen as carefully as we could and are thinking, oh no, this is what you really wanted. And so you can get into a contract and find out that the business deal isn't working and we're not getting where we need to be. And a lot of times that's about communication. So I think we can't just walk away and say, whoa, made it through, debrief, no protest. You know, that's just the beginning of the real important results we're trying to get for our government, and as taxpayers, we really have to pay attention to it post-award as well.
I'm thinking Mythbusters 4 for that.
Can I add to Dee's
Really
point?
got it started now.
Yeah, I think you know, it's often the case that despite everybody's best intentions, that after the contract is awarded and you press down the road a bit, you find out that there's something in the contract that just no longer makes sense. The best thing to do is to sit down collaboratively and to fix it. I mean, I can go on for, you know, all afternoon on stories of, you know, often what would happen is I was a PEO, so what that meant in the DOD, when they had big programs or programs in trouble, they sent them to me. And many cases, I would get into the program, and what would have happened is often fixed price contract, something changed, and they're in big trouble, largely because they didn't have courage to change the contract. And the longer you go not having recognized and fixed that problem, the worse it gets. It doesn't get any better. Because once a business arrangement goes sour, you know, and even though the government often says, well, they're on a fixed price contract, too bad, they're losing money. You will not get what you want. I mean, it's just about guaranteed, and so it's better to fix it, to get a solid business relationship, do it quickly, and move on.
That's great. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel.